and then I'll hit start recording, and we're live to go. So I'm going to start up the screens here. Let's see. Slideshow. And then do one other display. Okay, Ryan, I'm starting it up. Hi everybody, my name is Rob Canzaneri, and I'm the chapter leader of the Data Architecture Virtual Chapter. And I want to thank everyone for signing in today and joining the webcast. Today, I have asked Ryan Adams to join us and give a presentation on CMS and policy-based management. PASS is coming up, PASS Summit, and I have a special code here. It'll save you $150, and I put it at the bottom of my screen here so you can, see it. I'm going to record all the sessions. I'm recording all these sessions and putting them on YouTube, and you can go onto our PASS chapter board, SQLpass.org, go to the virtual chapter for data architecture, and there's a link under the archived sessions, and it will bring you right over to the YouTube site, and you can see any of our past sessions, and this one, I'll have it up in a week or so, and you can go back, and there's a lot of great sessions. Like I said, PASS is coming up. It's a great super event, and if you have an opportunity, I highly recommend it. And if you use this registration code that they gave me, the VCSUM07, it'll save you $150 off the registration. And I just can't highly recommend it more. It gets you involved. You learn a lot of stuff. If you have an opportunity, check it out. So here are some upcoming SQL Saturdays. Actually, Baton Rouge came and went, and I spoke it there, and Ryan was there too, as I remember. But if you have an opportunity, check out a SQL Saturday. They're free as far as I know, and you can network, meet a lot of people, and find out a lot of great information from PASS and SQL Saturday. So PASS also has a lot of virtual chapters out there, and here's just a little summary about them. I just want to put this up there to give you a scope of how many virtual chapters there are. There's lots of them, and if there's some interest that you want to get involved in, like DBA fundamentals, or you might want to learn more about business analytics, well, there's a virtual chapter, and they're always having webinars. There's a lot of webinars, a lot of free training. Log in, check it out. It might be something very useful to you. And last thing I'm going to mention before I turn it over to Ryan is that SQL Pass is always looking for volunteers. If you want to get more involved, there's always something out there for someone to do. And here are the connections. You can go to SQLpass.org and just send an email out. There's Twitter, a lot of ways to get connected into SQL Pass. So I'm going to change it over right now to Ryan. And here we go. Let's see. Okay, Ryan. And first of all, I want to thank Ryan for coming today. And secondly, if you have questions, type them in, and we'll try and keep the questions. I'll give them to Ryan, and and then if we don't get questions answered in the time frame, I'll mail them off to Ryan at the end. So thank you, Ryan, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. All right, so let me go ahead and get started here. All right, so today we're going to be talking about how to manage your shop with policy-based management and central management server. It's kind of a beginner intro thing, so if you're completely unfamiliar with it, don't worry about that. We'll get that covered. A little bit about myself. I do speak frequently. I was fortunate enough to speak at the PASS Summit last year. If you were able to come to the PASS Summit this year, make sure you hunt me down and say hi. I was fortunate enough to be speaking there again this year. I currently live in Dallas, Texas area, and I have worked for Verizon for about 16 years now. And I've done a little bit of everything from desktop, server, Active Directory, on up into SQL Server. Once I fell in with SQL Server, I never looked back. I love working with the product ever since. I speak at various SQL Saturdays. as you can see in a bunch of other conferences. I am pretty involved in the PASS community. I help run the local Dallas chapter. I'm on the board there. I'm also the president of the Performance Virtual chapter, if you guys have had a chance to check that chapter out as well. And I'm a regional mentor for the South Central region for PASS. So moving on, take a look at our objectives. So we got a few objectives here today, and we're going to start off by talking with Central Management Server first, and we'll take a look at how we can configure the Central Management Server. Then we're going to take a look at how we can import and export that. So a lot of times we're already using registered servers, and we're familiar with registering multiple connections to different SQL servers in Management Studio, and we'll look at basically how we can not have to reinvent the wheel, and we can kind of take advantage of what we already have. From there, we'll go into policy-based management. We'll look at how to create policies. We'll look at how to evaluate them. There are different ways to evaluate our policies to see if there are certain things that are violating those policies in our environment. Then we'll take a quick look at alerts and just a quick look at how we can report on that. Out of the box, policy-based management doesn't exactly come shouting at you and say, hey, something violated a policy. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can kind of get reports on those violations. So starting off with Central Management Server. The first thing to note about this is this is exactly like registered servers. So if you're in Management Studio and you use registered servers today and you've added connections, this is exactly the same thing. There are some differences, but the main advantage to using a Central Management Server is that we're putting all those connections on a server where everybody can access that. And it's really handy when you have multiple people in your shop, because if you decommission a server, or maybe you bring a new server up for a new project, instead of everybody having to go add or remove that connection out of their local Management Studio, all we need is one person to go in and change it on the server in one place, because everybody's connecting to that server and everybody's seeing all the connections on there. We only need to make that change in one single place, and then everyone else will automatically see that change. So a huge advantage, especially if you happen to be in a larger shop. There are a few requirements. The first one is it has to be on SQL 2008 instance. This was a feature that came out new in SQL Server 2008. Now, even though the Central Management Server has to be on a SQL 2008 instance, we can still add connections to 2000 and 2005 instances. So it's just the Central Management Server itself that has to be on 08 or above, but we can add connections to all the way down, for 2000 and 2005. Other thing is you can add, obviously you wouldn't want to waste a SQL Server license on a Central Management Server, so you can actually create a Central Management Server using the free Express edition if you want, which is handy. I could tell you that it is very lightweight because you're essentially just using the connection, so it's just a simple read-only. When somebody comes in, once you actually click on the connection to use it, you're connecting to that other server, so it's extremely lightweight. You could put this on a production server with almost zero impact. Security is also really simple to manage for these two things. So just have these two roles here. So the first one is the administrator role, and it is exactly what it sounds like. And it means that I can do anything. I can add connections, I can remove them, I can actually take the entire Central Management Server and disable it and turn it off, turn it on. We can do anything that we want. So that might be something that you say for your high-level admins, or just yourself, or whoever's kind of managing your Central Management Server, and then everybody else, you would add them to this group reader role you see there at the bottom. Both of these roles are in the MSDB, so all Central Management Server is actually stored in MSDB. So you want to make sure that you're backing that guy up, because if you're not backing it up and you lose all your connection objects, all your security, everything's kind of blown out of the water. So be very aware of that. But for your junior DBAs and guys that are just connecting in and want to be able to utilize these things, these connection objects, you can just add them to the reader role, which you can find in MSDB. So again, some of the advantages of why you might want to consider using a CMS, and the first one's the one we've already talked about, and that's that it's a central repository, right? So one single place where we can make these changes instead of having to make them on each individual user's laptop or desktop. The other cool thing it allows me to do is I can run a query against multiple servers simultaneously. So when I show you this, we can also put things in folders. And what's cool is it allows me to arrange them however I want, and then I can right-click on a folder and automatically query every server under that folder. So it can be really dangerous, but it can be really, really handy. And it does do it simultaneously, so it's not single-threaded. It doesn't do one after the other. It will actually query each server in its own simultaneous threads. allows you to group your servers logically. And this is something I highly encourage you to do, that as you're going through and you're creating your folders and you're putting connections in these folders, go ahead and make sure that when you do this that you model it after how your business operates. And I promise you that if you do that, it's going to make your life easier in the long run when it comes time to making changes, moving things around, editing things, just finding things in general. So for instance, if you have a group of DBAs that handles all the servers on the East Coast, you might want to make a folder called East, West, Central, and then add servers under that for the servers that are supported by that particular geographic area. But maybe you don't do that. Maybe you've got an application. That particular application might have servers spread out all over the country. So it might make more sense for you to say, you know what, there's a group of DBAs, this particular application, they support that. Let's put all of the SQL servers for that guy in that particular folder, and it makes it just a lot easier to find stuff that way. And when we get into policy-based management, CMS really makes policy-based management much more extensible than it is out of the box. Now, of course, everything that has advantages also has some disadvantages. The good news is I have workarounds for both of these for you. Well, at least I have a workaround for the first one. So if Server 1 is my central management server, but let's say that Server 1 also supports Application 5, and I have a folder in the CMS called App 5. So I also want to add Server 1 into that App 5 folder. You can't actually do that because you're adding a connection to the CMS on the actual CMS server itself, and you can't add a connection to itself. However, the check that it does, and if you go out, and I blog on ryanjadams.com, and I've got a blog post out there. I'm also, if you guys want, I announce all my blog posts through Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, I highly encourage you to go follow me on Twitter. My handle is Ryan J. Adams. Anytime I put new blog posts out, I announce them there. But I've got a post that explains how this works in detail. But the short story is, when you go out there, one of the main checks that this does when you create a connection object is make sure that it does a select add at server name, and make sure that the server names don't match. And that's one of the most important things that it actually does. But we can work around that by querying the server by anything else that's resolvable. So you see my examples here are using the local loopback IP address, 127.0.0.1. We could also use the public IP address. We could even use a fully qualified domain name, which I highly encourage you to always use the fully qualified domain names anyway. So if we add the connection, and I'll show you how this works here in a minute, we can use that as long as we can resolve the server by anything other than its NetBIOS name or what select add at server would return, then we can add that further down in our CMS. So very handy to know that. Other interesting thing is when you add connections for all of your registered servers, you can only use Windows authentication. You can't use SQL authentication. Now my question here is, why is that a disadvantage? And there's a couple reasons, but one of the main reasons it's a disadvantage is maybe your servers are in different domains that are not trusted. Now if they're in domains that are trusted, you're fine, but if they're in separate domains, then you're not going to be able to do that. And a primary example of why that might happen is if you have a DMZ environment where you've got stuff that's internet facing, and so you've put it in a demilitarized zone, you don't necessarily want to have access between that and your production environment, so you don't have a domain between that. So you're not going to be able to do Windows authentication. It's not going to work for you. Sometimes with test and dev environments, they're in separate untrusted domains. That would be another use case of why this would be a problem for you. You're not going to be able to add connections to those guys because they're using Windows authentication, and those are, you can only access those with SQL Auth. Now the good news is, if you are already using registered servers or you need more than one central management server, we can import and export them. So if I've already got a bunch of server connection objects registered in the registered servers, I can actually export those and import them into my central management server. Now when we do this, the one interesting thing here is that the exports are stored in an XML format. And what's interesting about this is there's actually a checkbox that says, do you want to export your server names and passwords? And that really threw up a red flag when I first saw that. I was like, you know what? I would really be curious to see exactly what gets exported and what is exposed. Because for me in some environments, that might not be a good thing to have that exposed in plain text. And because it spits it out in XML, and the short story here is if you're doing a local connection, it's Windows authentication, you don't have to worry about it. The username and password are not exported. If you're using SQL authentication, the username is exported, but the password is in a hashed value. And I'll show you that here in a second as well. So let's go ahead and jump into a demo right now. Let's see what Central Management Server looks like. So this is a demo machine just called Demo 1, so we'll go ahead and connect here. It is running SQL Server 2014 if you're curious. And so for our Central Management Server, the first thing, of course, if you're using registered servers, you're already aware of this, is where is it at? And by default, it's actually not shown to us. So if we go under View, and we do View Registered Servers, that will bring up a new tab here that will allow me to see my locally registered servers, okay, which you'll see under the local server groups, which some of you may already be familiar with using, and then Central Management Servers underneath that. So what we can do here is I can right-click Central Management Server. We'll do Register Central Management Server option, and I'm just going to use Demo 1. Now you'll notice that here I have Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication are both available to me. Okay, and I told you that Windows Auth was the only thing that we were allowed to use. Now that is true. However, that is only true when you're adding connection objects. When you're actually connecting to the Central Management Server to edit and make changes, you can use either authentication method. We'll stick with Windows authentication for now. Simple as that. Here we go. Demo 1 has been created. And from here, we just create folders. So if I can right-click and I can do a new server group, and I don't know, let's just call this prod for production. Maybe we'll do one for, let's do one for dev and test. And we can create groups underneath groups. So maybe I want to put all of my 2005 SQL servers in a 2005 folder. We can do that. So this is where I say structure this after how your business runs. You'll thank yourself in the long run. Now, you'll notice here that I've got 3 different instances available to me. Or I'm sorry, I have two instances. So the first one is Demo 01, and that is my local default instance. I also happen to have a named instance on here, and this named instance is called Inst01. That's just sitting here locally. So let's add some connections to that. They're not 2005, but we'll go ahead and add them here anyway. So we'll do new server registration, and then we'll look at Demo 1, and we'll go ahead and click Save. Now you'll notice that I get this error here. And the part that we're most interested in is just this last little section here. And this last little section tells me you can't add a shared registered server with the same name as the configuration server. So this is that workaround that we were talking about earlier that says, hey, you can't add the CMS to your CMS. Okay. So that's not an overly shocking error. That's not a bad thing. We kind of knew that was coming, right? So we'll click OK. Let's try one of the workarounds. We'll do new server registration again. This time I'm going to use my local loopback. So use 127.0.0.1 for my local loopback IP address. And we'll click Save here. And of course, it happens to work just fine with no issues at all. Okay, fantastic. But look at that. That shows an IP address. Now, maybe that's not so bad if, for whatever reason, you just happen to have this one particular server. But what if you have multiples that you're adding, and all of those have that same situation? Well, that doesn't look very good. You don't want a bunch of stuff in there with IP addresses. That's not very friendly. So I'm going to right-click and do Properties. And we could have done this when we created it. But the server name is what we use to connect up here at the top. But down here at the bottom, this I can actually change. So let's just call it Demo 1. Click Save, and it kind of renames it. So then we can go ahead and we can let's do another registration. Let's add our named instance here. Go ahead and click Save. And there we go. We've got connection objects. If we want to use it, I can just double click on it. It'll automatically connect me over here in Object Explorer to that named instance. Good to go. Nice and simple. The other thing we can do, and let me, before I do this, let me show you. So this is just a connection to the default instance demo 1 here. So if I open up a new query, I really just want you to look at this bottom bar here and notice that it's yellow. It says connected 1 out of 1. And it kind of tells me over here what I'm connected to. So it tells me the server name's demo1, it shows me the account, and I'm in the master database. And here's the reason why I want to show you that. I'm going to disconnect from that guy. We'll go back over to my central management server. If I were to right-click on this 2005 folder, I have a new query option here. I can also do Object Explorer. But if I do new query here, and this time I go down and take a look at the bar, you'll notice some differences. And the first one says, you're connected to 2 out of 2. Okay, so that means I attempted to connect to 2 servers and it successfully connected to both servers, 2 out of 2. But you also notice that the color is different. It's kind of this pink salmon type color. Those are primary indicators you need to be very aware of that tells you that, hey, you are connected to more than one server at a time. You'll also notice over here it shows this 2005 right here. So instead of the server name, it actually shows the folder that we clicked on. And then, of course, the rest of the regular information that we see, database we're connected to, the account we're using, all that kind of good stuff. So if I wanted to find out what version I'm running, and I just did a select add at version, and we went and ran that. We'll expand the results a little bit here. We'll zoom in. You'll notice that it came back with 2 rows, and it also added a column. It added this server name column over here. Normally, if we just queried that on a single server, we wouldn't have that column. So this allows me to go, okay, this is the result set for this server. So I can see that, hey, this line says the named instance demo1 insta1. It's running SQL Server 2014 64-bit edition. And it'll tell me what the OS is, and of course the line below that. So that's pretty powerful. If all of a sudden you've got some, serious patching you've got to do. Microsoft releases a service pack, and you're trying to figure out, and your boss goes, hey, we need to verify that all of our 500 servers happen to have Service Pack 1 installed. Well, I can go query all 500 of them all at one time and get those results very quickly. So that's very, very handy to be able to do that. But this would also be really, really dangerous, because if I'm like making an update to a table, I happen to be dropping a table or something like that, and I'm connected to test and production at the same time, and I forget, and then I may drop something in production that I wasn't supposed to drop. So there's a danger factor here too, and that's why I point out the color change down at the bottom is an excellent indicator to say, hey, just so you're aware, you are connected to more than one server at a time. All right, so last thing with Central Management Server I want to show you, I'm going to go and close this. I'm going to delete these connections here real quick. Is what if, and I only have 3 of them here. Now, these first 2, this is connecting to the local demo1 instance with Windows off. But this guy is running, if I look at property, he's running SQL authentication here. So I can see I'm using SQL auth with CMS user. And remember, something with SQL auth, that connection type is not allowed inside of demo1. In fact, if I go in here and do a new server registration like we did earlier, you'll notice that this box is grayed out. We can't change it to SQL authentication. So let's see what happens when we do an export-import with this. And the demo1 insta1 is just a Windows authentication connection to our named instance that we happen to have here. So I'll right-click here, and we'll go under Tasks, and we'll go to Export. I'm going to choose the file to export it to, cms.regsvr, just in my local ctemp here. This is the checkbox that I found interesting when I first did this that I was talking about earlier. Do not include usernames and passwords in the export file. I wanted to know what happened if I had some junior DBA that came in here and he unchecked this box for some weird reason and said OK. This is just saying, hey, the file's already there. Do you want to overwrite it? Yes, we'll overwrite it. Successful export. And then I just want to show you really quickly, and I'm going to just, you have to give me a second to kind of zoom in and find the spot, but I want to show you what this looks like. Now, of course, this is the most beautiful thing I'm sure you guys have all seen on the face of the planet. Everybody absolutely is in love with XML. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous thing when you're reading through it, trying to find stuff. The very first one that's in here is Demo 1 using SQL Auth, which, by the way, even though that's the first one in the file, that was not the first connection object that I had over here. That's actually the second one right here. Okay, so things get exported in a completely random order. When you re-import them, they also get imported in a completely random order. And that's important to know, and I will show you why here in a second. But here's what gets exported. The first thing you're going to notice is this says my connection string has an encrypted password. I can tell you that even though it uses the word encrypted password, this indeed is not an encrypted password. The password is hashed, which means that a hashed password is not exactly unbreakable, as many of you may know. So even though it uses the word encrypted, I want you to be aware it is not encrypted. It exposes my data source. Okay, so my server name is exposed. It exposes my user ID, which is CMS user. Now that stuff might not be a big deal for you, but when I taught on SQL Cruise, I met a gentleman that worked for the Department of Defense. And for him, in a government job, that's a problem. They're not allowed to have usernames exposed in plain text anywhere. So for you, this might not be a big deal, or it might be. So I just wanted to point that out to make sure that you guys are aware of that. The other thing here, too, is, and this is what the password looks like. It's long, it scrolls off the screen, it's beautiful hashed value right there. Now, if I scroll down a little bit further, here is a connection to Demo 1 Insto 1. Okay, this is our named instance, but we're using Windows authentication here. Now, what this guy exposes is not so bad. He does expose the data source, so the server name is exposed. But all he says is integrated security equals true. That's it. So there's no username here. There's no password. We're just using integrated security, so we don't have to worry about anything being exposed here. And you'll notice that the third one connection is actually Demo 1, which is my local default instance. Let's go import this and see what happens. I'm going to import them back into my 2005 folder. I will right-click, and we're going to do import policies. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong thing. Right-click, we're going to do tasks, we're going to do import. We'll point it to the file that we just exported to. I'm going to click OK. I get this error message. However, you guys are probably going to recognize this. We've already seen this once before. You can't add a shared registered server with the same name. So remember, one of my local connections, this guy here, that guy happens to be the exact same box as my CMS server. And we can't add a connection to the CMS server. So you've got some choices here. Your choice is you can go back to the XML file and remove that out of the XML, or I can simply just remove it out of here, delete it, and then I can export and re-import all over again, which is probably the easier method than going through and just hacking out a bunch of XML. Now, what I will tell you is that it did not import anything. Now, Demo 1 was actually the end of that file. And I tell you that it exports stuff at random and it imports it at random. So on the import, when it does this, it happened to hit that first, which is why we didn't see anything get imported at all. However, it is possible that maybe this SQL auth guy and this Demo 1 Insto guy, maybe he was in the middle. If he was in the middle, then one of the connections would have shown up. So it lists the connections out in whatever random order it is, and as soon as it hits the one that's an error, it stops at that point forward. So if it had successful ones prior to that error, then you will see some connection objects actually get imported. In our case, the error happened to be the very first one, and so nothing came in. It could have been the last one, in which case we would have seen the other two show up. But it's completely random. Every time I do this demo, it is you never know what's going to happen. This time it happened to be the first one, so we didn't see anything come in. You never know what's going to happen from there on forward. All right.
Hey Ryan, we have a
Yeah.
question here, and while you're in this area, I thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah.
The question says, can an instance appear in more than one folder?
Yeah, you know what? Why don't we find out? So let's add new server registration. Let me go back full screen because it's probably hard to see. We'll add demo 1, insta 1 right here. We'll click save. And let's add them under this test folder too. Same guy, demo 1, insta 1. We'll click save. And there's your answer. So yes, we can add them multiple times to multiple folders on down. Do you have any other questions, or was that it? All right. Let's move on to the policy-based management piece now that we've looked at central management server. And we'll kind of come back later and we'll see how those things tie in together a little bit. So this is a lot like central management server, where it's supposed to be a centralized way for us to make sure that all of our servers are identical. So what this does is allows us to set up policies, which is basically just a bunch of settings of rules, and we can apply those rules to all of our servers. So if you've got a large environment, this is really handy because it allows me to have consistency in my environment and enforce that consistency. So I can say, hey, look, all of these SQL servers that support app 4 need to have these settings, but all of them that support app 1 need to have these settings. So I can do that, which is really, really cool to make sure that I am consistent in my environment, so I'm not constantly having to go, oh, did this setting get changed on this guy, and did this setting get changed over here? I could do all that through policy-based management. So key requirements, it was new in SQL Server 2008. It is supported in Standard, Enterprise, and Developer Edition, all three. Now we can run policies against 2000 and 2005 instances, but we can actually only use the policy, only create the policies on 2008 Standard, Enterprise, or Developer. I will tell you that Express Edition is a little misleading because you can actually create policies on Express Edition, but you can't evaluate them. You can't do anything with it. So although you may see it documented in some places that Express Edition is supported, it's really not, because all you can do is create policies. You can't actually do anything with them. To me, that's not really supported. Everything, just like your central management server, is stored in MSDB. So again, make absolutely certain that you're backing up your system databases, and in particular, in this case, MSDB. Those guys really, really need to be backed up. If you lose it, everything's gone. So here's some of the terminology that we use. So the first one is a facet. A facet is a particular aspect of SQL Server. They'll make more sense when I show them to you, but this is how Microsoft has decided to, for lack of a better word, categorize things or lump them into particular aspects of SQL Server. Conditions are used for multiple things. And conditions can define what type of servers that we're wanting to focus on. Maybe we only want a particular group of servers. Maybe we only want servers that are running particular editions of SQL Server. So conditions can define a lot of these other things. Like a target is a particular set of servers. We can use a condition to define what targets we want to hit or which servers we want to hit. The policy you see there in the middle, the policy is really nothing more than a container that holds all of these other things. So you will see the facet, the condition, the target, all those things are stored inside the policy. Same with server restrictions and categories. That's why I hated to use the word category when describing a facet earlier, because we can actually take policies and put them in categories. One of my prime examples there that I use it for is if I have certain settings to make sure that I'm compliant with, say, SOX or a CPI, maybe a HIPAA, some of those types of things. I could take a bunch of them and put all of them in a SOX category, and then I know that when I have new servers come online, I can just apply that whole category, and all of those policies will get applied to that server, and I know that they're going to be SOX compliant or have settings to be SOX compliant. So that's kind of a really handy thing we can use categories for. So when we create policies, there's a couple different ways we can do it. And the first one is manually. So if we create them manually, we can either do it through the GUI or T-SQL. I'm just going to pop these up here real quick. So these are really just show kind of the methodology, how you kind of step through it. So if you're going through the GUI, we're going to create a check condition is the first thing that it requires us to create. Once we create that inside the policy, then we need to define which check condition that we created, any targets that we have, any evaluation modes, which I'll explain here shortly, any server restrictions. Server restrictions are like, I only want this to work on Developer Edition or Enterprise Edition. Or we can do this through T-SQL. Now I show this here for, the reason I show this is, one, just so you can see what it looks like and what they are. These store procs that you see here are undocumented. So I don't actually suggest that you use this. This is one of the few times that I will tell you that it is absolutely fine to use the GUI. My general warning is the only time you want to use the GUI is when you know what the GUI is hiding from you. There is nothing that the GUI is hiding from you with policy-based management. There's nothing under the hood, any other extra options or things that it doesn't show or expose to you. You're perfectly fine to use the GUI. Quite honestly, it is much easier. However, policy-based management out of the box was really only designed to work on an individual single SQL server. Well, that's not really extensible for me because the value to me is being able to take these policies and apply them across multiple servers in my environment. I manage more than just one server. So the advantage to having the T-SQL here is it means that I can script this stuff out on one server after I've created it, and then I can quote-unquote import it. And you can do an export-import on policies. I'll show you here as well. But I can basically just script all of that in T-SQL and run on multiple servers. So I wanted you to at least be able to see that. I will show you with CMS how you don't really need to do that and create, basically duplicate this process on every single one of your servers. But out of the box, that was how kind of the policy-based management was really designed. So obviously the other way that I just alluded to was importing and exporting. So after you've created a bunch of policies, you can export them and re-import them into all of your other servers. We can also import Microsoft best practice policies. So these guys are already here. I say they're installed by default, but what it is every time you install SQL Server, the files are on the file system in that location. You don't actually need to write that down. As soon as you open up and you go to right-click and do import, it will take you to that folder automatically. You just document it here so that you can pull the slides down and if you ever want to review it later. And those Microsoft best practice policies are, if you're just starting with PBM, that is the best place to start. Because what it does is it allows you to kind of explore and get a good idea of what the different options are when you see how other people and how Microsoft have designed their policies, just to see what the different options are, how they've built out expressions, how they've targeted certain things. So there's some definite advantage that if you're just learning and wanting to look at stuff, it's a great, great place to start. Now when you do import these, there's a few options. So when you export them, you can either have it in an enabled state or a disabled state. And so on import, you can kind of choose what you want to do here. So I can either say preserve state, and preserve means whatever state it was in when it got exported, go ahead and bring it in that state. So if it was in a disabled state when I export it, when I bring it in, it's going to be disabled. Or I can overwrite that behavior and say I want it to be enabled, no matter, I don't care how it got exported as, I want it to come in enabled, or I want to come in disabled. And you'll notice I put stars around disabled. And I did that for a reason, because I want you guys, when you go out there and you start importing these, to always, always, always bring them in a disabled state. There is absolutely no reason not to bring them in a disabled state. And I tell you this because these are policies that other people have written, Microsoft included, or anybody else that you found on the internet. You need to review these policies and be absolutely certain they're going to behave in your environment, how somebody else purported on the internet that how it works in their environment. Not everybody's environment is the same. Not everything you read inside of a policy is exactly how it looks. So just bring it in disabled, review it, and it's just a right-click to turn it on. So it's not a big deal to go in and enable it after the fact. It's just a right-click, turn it back on. Okay. So always, always, always bring it in a disabled state. I encourage you to do that. Now we've talked about how when we create the policies and these rules and configuration settings, how can I evaluate those in my environment to make sure that my servers are compliant? So the first one is on-demand, and on-demand is a manual evaluation, meaning that we're in Management Studio, we're looking at our policies, I'm right-clicking on it and saying evaluate it. Tell me whether this server complies with all of the settings in this policy. On schedule means we can make Management Studio, we can go into SQL Server Agent and have the agent run it on a regular basis so that we don't have to do it manually anymore. It'll just automatically check it on any interval that we want to define. Now the last two, those guys are kind of interesting. Now, in order for them to even be available for you to use, the setting that you're targeting has to raise a DDL event inside SQL Server. Not only does it have to raise a DDL event, but everything inside of a facet has to raise a DDL event in order for it to be possible. So I can tell you now that if you go in and you look at a setting and you know for an absolute fact that it raises a DDL event, I mean, you can go trace it and prove that it raises a DDL event, and all of a sudden you're going, this thing raises a DDL event, but on-change, log only, and prevent are not available options to me. Why? And the reason is because there is at least one other setting inside of that facet that does not allow or raise DDL events. If any one of them inside of a facet doesn't raise a DDL event, then even though the others do, you will not see on-change available to you. Now, there are some settings that are actually included in multiple facets. So if you run into that spot in that problem where you're wanting to do on-change and you'll raise a DDL event, go look in the other facets. It might be somewhere else in another facet that will allow you to do that. And log only does exactly what it sounds like. It means that as a change occurs, just log it. It may violate the policy. Go ahead and allow the change to actually occur, but just log it. Now prevent says, not only do I want you to catch the fact that this occurred, and it will still log it, but I want you to prevent it. So don't allow it to happen. Roll the change back. Now prevent, the terminology that they use here, I hate the word that they use prevent because it doesn't actually prevent it. It actually allows the transaction to occur. It uses CLR, puts it in a CLR wrapper to wrap it inside of a transaction, so it actually allows it to occur, figures out that it violates the policy, then rolls it back. So prevent's a little bit of a misnomer. It doesn't prevent it from actually occurring. It lets it happen, figures out it violates it, and rolls it back. So if it's a large change, be aware that there's going to be a rollback involved there. So when we go to evaluate these, we can evaluate a single policy against a single instance, which I will show you today. We can evaluate multiple policies at one time against a single instance, and of course the inverse of both of those. We can evaluate a single policy against multiple instances or multiple policies against multiple instances. Those last two require a central management server to do that. Because remember, PBM was really only allowed or designed out of the box to evaluate policies on that local server on which you've created them. But if we want to evaluate one or more policies against multiple instances of the SQL Server, we're going to have to utilize our CMS for that. And that's where these two different technologies work together really, really well, because CMS allows you to make PBM far more extensible than how it was designed out of the box. So let's jump in. I always love this slide because I really, really wish it had been a video. I'd like to see the landing from this guy. But yeah, it's a good one. All right. So let me go into my VM here. Now I'm going to utilize, let me connect to my local default instance here. We're going to utilize this guy. We're going to go under the management node here, and we'll see policy management here. And policy management, you'll notice that it's kind of got a red down arrow on the icon here. That means it's currently disabled. Turning it on is as easy as right-click, enable. It's as easy as that. So now we're ready to go. Now, I don't have any conditions or policies yet. I haven't created anything. But let's look at those facets first. So I'm going to do View Object Explorer Details here so we can kind of see this. This is how Microsoft has put all of these together. And these are the different aspects of SQL Server. So we can kind of see how they've done it where, oh, here's an availability group. Here's a database that's inside of an availability group, availability database. Here's stuff that's focused on just database options. Here's stuff focused on endpoints. We're also going to see stuff in here for like stored procedures, triggers. Here's one for stored procedures. Here's one for tables, triggers, and that's how these things are designed. So if I go up and let's look at databases, we're going to use that one quite a bit today. These are all the different database options that we can use. Now remember with the on-chains that if one of these raises a DDL event but any of them doesn't, even if one of them in this list does not, then you won't be able to have on-chains as an option. But you can kind of see how they've done this, right? So everything's focused on the database level. Recovery model, snapshot isolation, trustworthy option, what version is it, who's the owner? That could be good. If you're doing any mirroring, there's a bunch of mirroring stuff in here. We can look at the partner. Is it considered a system object? Who's the database owner? We've even got some permission stuff in here. Is database denied data reader, deny data writer? But everything is focused to the database level. So hopefully that's a really good place that when you're trying to figure out what settings are available to you, go take a look at the facets. And this will give you a better idea of how Microsoft has kind of organized these things for us to be able to utilize. All right, so let's create our first policy. So our first policy, what we're going to do here is we're going to look at auto create statistics. And let's say I want auto create statistics to be turned on all of my servers. So I'll right-click policies. I'm going to choose new policy. First thing we need to do is give it a name. Let's just call this auto stats. First thing we have to do is create a condition here. I don't have any current conditions at all on my servers. There's nothing to choose from here, so we'll just do new condition. I'm going to call this auto stats on. And this is where we define what we want to look for. So obviously the first thing it says, hey, what facet is the setting you're in? So for us it's going to be the database facet. The field I'm looking for here is going to be, and these are all the same fields that we just looked at inside of the database facet, and I'm obviously looking for auto create statistics. So here it is, auto create statistics enabled. I'll expand that so we can see that a little bit better. That's the field I'm looking for. Now you'll notice this is an expression field, so we can add more than one thing here, and we will here in a minute. But for now we're just going to leave this auto create statistics enabled. You notice that we've got an operator column here. Equals and not equals is all we're going to see for right now. It depends on which field you select. Some fields have more operator options available to you. This one I can tell you will only have equals and not equals, and then we can choose the value. And for us, we want auto create statistics to be turned on, so we want that to be true. So again, you can see equals and not equals is all that's here. We'll choose equals. True is exactly what we're looking for. We want auto create to be true, so we'll click OK here. We'll see what targets do you want it to go run against. It's at the database level, so by default it's picked every database. Okay, so this should check to make sure the auto create stats is on every single database that I have. Here's that evaluation mode that we talked about, and you'll see that I only have two options available, on demand and on schedule. So we're going to go with on demand. Obviously, at least one thing is not going to raise a DDL event here because on change was not a choice for us. We're just going to look at on demand or manual mode here. We're not going to work with server restrictions. We're not going to worry about that. So we'll go ahead and click OK. And then once we've created the policy, we can see that it created both the policy and the condition over here. We can see them both. If I right-click Auto Stats and I do Evaluate, that is a manual evaluation. So what it's doing is it's running this policy against the local instance. If I expand the target column here, this will tell us every database that it ran on. So obviously I've got reporting services on here, I've got PBM1 and PBM2, and I've got several other databases on here. If I can move this up so we can see them all. There we go. There's all the databases that are on here. And I can see that I actually have two databases that have failed this policy. So they must have auto create stats turned off. Now, if I highlight the red one, which we'll just look at, this is the PBM2 database, I can click this View Hyperlink here in the Details column, and this gives me some more statistics. And it says, hey, the field Auto Create Statistics enabled, I expected that to be true. That's what I was looking for. The actual value was false. Now, I realize that that's not overly revolutionary information right here because we're just looking at a Boolean true-false value, but there are some places where we can look at actual data values, and then those columns and that data is far more valuable to me. So we'll click Close here. I'm going to check the box. I'm going to go down here and click Apply. And two things are going to happen here, and they're going to happen very, very quickly when I click Apply. So I'm going to hit that. It says applying the policy modifies the selected targets that do not comply. Do you want to apply the policy? Yes, I do. So it's done two things. You'll notice that this line is now green. So first it changed the setting, and then it went and re-evaluated the policy a second time just to make sure that this setting actually did get changed and took effect. Now if I click View, because it's green, it'll say, hey, the expected value was true, the actual value was also true, we're good to go. So that's really, really cool, that I can automatically change the settings without going, I don't have to go to that database, I don't have to go to that server to change the setting, I can do it right here on demand. So that is really, really handy. So we'll go ahead and click Close there. Now let's look at how we can schedule this stuff. Actually, we're going to look at how to do on schedule by pulling in one of Microsoft's best practice policies. So let me right-click Policies. We're going to go over here to Import Policy option. Again, we click the ellipsis. It's automatically going to take us right where we need to go. If I back up, I'm actually already in a little too far. It'll actually take you to this folder here, and we can see that, hey, we've got some options here for reporting services, database engine, or analysis services. So there are some other policies for analysis services and reporting services. We're going to look at database engine. That's 1033 folder. We're going to look at auto shrink. So we want to make sure that auto shrink is turned off on all of our servers. So we'll import that. This is Microsoft best practice policy. Here's that replace duplicate items with, that are imported and the policy state. I'm going to change it to disable. Disable all policies on import. Replace duplicate items basically means that, hey, if this policy already exists with the exact same name, override it. So that's handy if you suspect that maybe somebody else went in there and altered some of the settings in this policy after the fact, and so you want to re-import it to make sure that the settings are put back. Now, there's a good and bad here. Every time you evaluate a policy in your environment, it stores that evaluation history in MSDB. That way you can see, hey, I've done it 15 times in the last 10 days. What was the result? Well, it does not, when you do replace, it does not overwrite that history. So on one hand, it sounds cool that it keeps it, but what if the settings weren't the same? Well, if the settings weren't the same and you didn't check to see whether they were the same or not, then that evaluation history is not really valid for you anymore because it's based on the old settings, not the new settings that you wanted it to be. So just be aware of that. So I'll click OK here. Now you'll notice that not only did it bring in the policy over here, we created this auto stats on, this first guy here. When we did the import for the auto shrink, it actually pulled in 3 different conditions with it. Okay, so this policy has one policy but 3 different conditions. So let's see what it looks like. Database auto shrink. So the check condition here says auto shrink disabled. I'm going to click the ellipsis just to make sure that the settings are what I expect them to be. And it says, okay, well, you're looking at the database performance facet, which, by the way, I can tell you this also exists in the database facet. But they use the database performance facet. The field is auto shrink. They wanted to make sure that it was turned false. We want auto shrink to be off. The value should be false. Okay, that looks like exactly what we would want it to be. Online user databases. Okay. We can click that, and it'll show us the facet here is the database facet, and it's looking to say that is system object is false. So what it's saying is this a system database? We don't want this to run against system databases, so is system object should be false so that it only runs against user databases, and the status should be normal. So we don't want to be in any suspect mode. We don't want to be in a restoring state or anything like that. We want to be in a normal mode. I'm going to change the evaluation mode here to on schedule. I'm just going to pick one for now. We can create a new one or you can pick one. We're obviously not going to wait till 7 p.m. even though it says weekly 7 p.m. I'm just going to pick one. And then the server restriction says Enterprise or Standard Edition. Okay, let's click the ellipsis just to be sure. Oh, that's kind of interesting. They built out an expression here. Now, it's supposed to be Enterprise and Standard, but if you look at this, the first row says Standard, the second row says Enterprise or Developer. So really, if you thought that this was only going to run on Enterprise and Standard, wrong. It's going to run on standard, enterprise, and developer, all three. Now for this particular, for AutoShrink, I probably don't care. That's great. But this is why I tell you to bring it in a disabled state and check every single setting to make sure it's going to behave how you expect it to in your environment before you go and turn it on. I'm okay with that. That's fine. I'm going to enable the policy. We'll click OK. And then I'm going to go down to SQL Server Agent because it should just schedule it. Now the job that it created is this guy right here. Let me drag this out. I'll zoom in. That's the job it created. Wow. That looks really awesome, right? That is a sweet job name with an awesome GUID in the name. That's really cool. So now that I have 30 or 40 of these, I know exactly which job that matches which policy, right? Wrong. I have no clue looking at that job which policy that belongs to. Not a one. It doesn't say AutoShrink in it. It doesn't have the name of the policy in it. Nothing. So what I encourage you to do is every time you do an on-schedule policy, go down into the job and rename it. Give it a friendly name so that we know what in the world that one actually does and which one it matches to. If you don't, you're going to have no idea what that matches to. So if we want to run it, I can right-click. We'll do start the job. And this guy's going to run. Now, word of warning here. When this guy runs and he comes back and he says, I'm all green, I ran successfully, that means the job ran successfully. That does not mean that there were any violations of the policy. Violations very well may have still occurred. It just means that the job ran okay. So after it's done running, and there we go, it successfully ran. Again, just a job doesn't mean that there wasn't a failure. If I go back to Database AutoShrink and I right-click and I do View History, sure enough, there was a violation of the policy. I can click the Details tab. AutoShrink was expected to be false, and it was actually true. In order to figure out which database it was, again, beautiful XML down here in the detail row, it was PBM1. So AutoShrink was turned on in the PBM1 database. If I continue to scroll down, there might have been another failure in here too. Oh, I guess not, just that one. So that's how we can kind of see that. All right, so last thing I'm going to show you in the interest of time, because we were bumping right up on that hour and I went a little bit longer than I expected. Normally this presentation is about an hour and a half, is the alerts. I've got this in my slide deck. You don't have to memorize any of this, but these 4 alerts are all you need to know. If I go in and use this and do it on an error number, and I'll give you all these error numbers, any violation that occurs, you can get an email as soon as that violation occurs. And all you need are these 4. But I just wanted to show that to you real quick. So let me flip over to the slide deck. I realized, unfortunately, I didn't have time to show you some other stuff. If you guys want to hang around, I can do that. But let me finish up the slide deck here. So on alerts, obviously, standard requirements. You need to have database mail turned on, your operators. Go set that up in the SQL agent, all that kind of good stuff. And then set up for these error numbers. On change sounds weird why I have 2 of them for on change prevent. So one means automatic. So, and if I have time to go back and you guys want to hang around, I'll show you one for stored procedure naming conventions. So let's say maybe I don't want any of my developers to create a stored proc that begins with SP underscore. I want it to be different than what the default stored procedure naming convention is. If he goes in and he creates it and violates the policy, he'll get kicked out automatically. That is an automatic on-change prevent, which will do that 35050, the very first one. However, if I created this policy and the server's been in production for 6 months and there's already a bunch of stored procs that have been created with SP underscore, well then that trigger, because remember, on change means a DDL event has to be erased. Well, it's already been created. It's not going to raise a DDL event after the fact. But I can go in and right-click in policy-based menus. I can right-click that policy and run it on demand. When you do it that way, it raises that second error number. Then obviously log only and anything on schedule has 2 different error numbers. Now you'll notice that there's not one for on demand. Well, you saw how it worked. If I'm running it on demand, I'm already looking at it right there. I don't really need to get an email or an alert jumping up at me because I'm looking at it already. There's something out there called the Enterprise Policy Management Framework. It is on codeplex.com. It has a bunch of requirements, but if you look at the setup, all of those requirements, even though they look kind of hefty, they provide everything for you. Management database, they report the BIDS reporting project that you can deploy for reporting services. Everything's already there. So it's really cool if you want to look at these reports. I highly encourage you to go take a look at that open source project. Just a bunch of use cases you can look at of why you might want to use policy-based management. Obviously, we looked at auto-create stats and auto-shrink, but there's some really good ones in here, making sure backup compression is turned on, checking your recovery models. There's a bunch of really great ones in here, so just a list that you can go back and look at later. So summary of everything we talked about today, we looked at central management server. Where's it located at? How do we configure it? If I've already got a bunch of connection objects, how can I import those into my central management server instead of reinventing that wheel? How to create the policies. We looked at the different ways to evaluate those, right? On demand, on change, log only, and prevent. And then on schedule. Quick look at the alerts. So again, you can hit my blog, ryanjadams.com, click presentations at the top, and you can download this slide deck. You can view all of those alert numbers if you want to set that up on your own. All of the information for where to pull down off codeplex.com to pull down the Enterprise Policy Management Framework. You can pull all that down. A couple of resources for you. This book, ProSQL 2008 Policy-Based Management, those are the three guys that wrote it there, Ken Simmons, Colin Stasek, and Jorge Segarra. I know Jorge and Colin pretty well. They're both fantastic guys. They blog about this stuff. They're all on Twitter, so if you've got questions, you can ask any of these guys. You can ask me if you're running into something. Again, there's the deck. You can go to ryanjadams.com/presentations, or you can just click the presentations button at the top of my blog. If you're on Twitter, I encourage you to go follow me on Twitter. It's Ryan J. Adams. And there's, of course, my email, my blog address down there at the bottom. So I know we're here at the top of the hour. We're a little over. If you guys want to hang around, I know a lot of you probably have to get back to work. You've got to jump on this stuff. I'm more than happy to sit here and answer questions for as long as we need to. I'm more than happy to show the demo if you guys want to go look at the on-change prevent and how that piece works. I've got a demo to show you that. I'm more than happy to do that if you guys want to hang around. Just let me know in the question and answer pane what you want to do. And then, Rob, we have any questions?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I got you.
Okay, good. I had it on mic mute for a minute. We just have two questions here. First question is, could you use register servers to apply policies with the CMS?
Yeah, you can, and so that's the power of central management server, and that's where it makes it extensible, right? So if I went back over to my CMS server here, and see I have, let's add the other guy. Let me add demo 1 here. Actually, I need to do 127.0.0.1 so we don't have that weird issue. We'll rename him demo 1 here. So what I can do here is I can right-click this 2005 folder, and I can do evaluate policies. It says choose a source, meaning where are your policies stored, and of course my PBM server is demo 1. So say that's where it is. As soon as I click OK, it goes out here and it finds every policy that's on that one. And so we'll see, hey, look, here's that auto stats. Here's that database auto shrink. There's a bunch of built-in default ones. I can click the evaluate button, and this will actually go out and run it against both servers because remember, I clicked in my CMS. It's going to run it on every server from that level down. So sure enough, I can see, hey, look, here's in the server column, here's the 127.0.0.1. Here's demo 1, insta 1. So that's how we can use CMS to run our policies against multiple servers at one time. So now I don't have to create all these policies and like import, export, and duplicate it all over all these servers. I create them on one server, and then I just use my CMS to evaluate it across my entire environment. Oh, and if you pull down the Enterprise Policy Management Framework and you're looking at automating this, you would have to set up a job and do this through PowerShell. One of the reasons I tell you to pull down the EPMF is because they already have it written. They give you the PowerShell script to do this and run your policies against your CMS. It's a great place to get a look at how they do it.
Okay. Speaking of PowerShell, we have another question on PowerShell, and it basically is, what is your take on doing policy-based management versus doing the same thing in PowerShell? Because policy-based management doesn't cover all the environments. We still have instances way down to SQL 2000.
So you can still evaluate your policies all the way down to 2000. So you can use policy-based management all the way down to 2000. Your policy-based management server has to be oh 08 or above, but I can evaluate policies on 2000, 2005, all the way down. There are some things, obviously, with PowerShell. It's extremely extensible. There are definitely some things with PowerShell that policy-based management cannot do. However, and if you're really good with PowerShell, that's fine. But if you're not, policy-based management, as you can see, walking through the GUI and doing stuff is far, far easier than it is to actually code this. So they're a lot less time-intensive to go through and set this stuff up using policy-based management as opposed to using PowerShell. So quite honestly, it's a pick-your-tool type situation. What works best for you? If it's easier for you to create this stuff in PBM, then by all means use PBM. I use policy-based management for everything that I can. For the few rare things that I can't pull information from through PowerShell, then I'll go write PowerShell for that.
Thank you. Okay. One last question here, and we're going to kind of wrap it up after that. I just have to get back to work too. But,
gotcha. No worries.
Is there a way to create a new facets now or in the future?
No, there's no way to create facets. So unfortunately, that is something that Microsoft created, and there's nothing to do that you can do with that. They add stuff with every new version. I can tell you between 08 and 2012, almost everything they added was around always-on availability groups. The list that they added in 2014 is not a whole lot larger, but off the top of my head, I'd have to go look to tell you exactly what new stuff got added in 14.
Great. Well, thank you, Ryan, for coming today and doing your webinar. I appreciate it a lot, and we've got a lot of great questions. And if anyone has a question, email me or you can email Ryan, and I'm sure Ryan will be glad to answer you.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Appreciate everybody joining today.
Okay. Y'all have a great evening. I hope everybody has a great weekend. And thanks again. And look forward to everyone coming back next month for our next presentation. Bye.